Commander Vexi stood before the assembly of young alien cadets, his scarred blue skin catching the light from the academy's tall windows. His forearms moved slowly as he adjusted his ceremonial uniform, each movement deliberate and weighted with years of combat experience. The room fell silent as the old Zephyrian warrior began to speak. You sit here today in peace because of a species you have never met, he said, his deep voice carrying across the packed auditorium. A species we once called weak, a species we nearly ignored when the machines came. For us all, the cadets leaned forward, eager to hear the legendary commander stories. Vexi had fought in more battles than any living warrior, but these particular tales were rarely told. Today, he would share the truth about the humans. 15 cycles ago, when the hegemony first appeared in our sector, we Zephyrians laughed at the threat. Our ships were massive, our armor thick, our weapons powerful. We had conquered 12-star systems and enslaved 40 lesser races. What could some machines do against the might of the Zephyrian Empire? Vexi's mandibles clicked together, a sign of bitter amusement among his people. The machines showed us quickly. They moved faster than we expected. They learned from every battle. They never tired, never feared, never retreated unless it served their purpose. Within 6 months, they had taken 8 of our colonies. The commander walked to a large display screen showing a map of the galaxy as it was during the early days of the war. Red markers indicated hegemony, controlled space spreading like a infection across the star charts. Our High Command finally admitted we needed allies. The Cathari joined us first, bringing their plasma weapons. Then came the Nexari with their shield technology. But when the human delegation arrived at our war council, we almost sent them away. Vexi touched a control and images appeared on the screen. The cadets gasped at what they saw. The humans looked so small, so fragile compared to the other species present. They had no natural armor, no claws, no enhanced strength. They seemed barely capable of surviving on their own worlds, let alone fighting a galactic war. Captain Jake Morrison was their representative. Vexi continued. He stood no taller than a Zephyrian child, weighing perhaps 1/3 of what I did. His skin was soft, his bones thin. When he spoke, his voice lacked the rumbling authority we expected from warriors. The old commander's eyes grew distant as he remembered that first meeting. Morrison told us humanity could offer 50,000 ships and 2 million soldiers. We laughed. The Cathari representative actually asked if the humans planned to overwhelm the machines with their corpses, but Morrison did not get angry. He did not challenge our insults to combat as we expected. Instead, he smiled and said something I will never forget. Judge us by our actions, not our appearance. We may look weak, but we have survived things that would break stronger species. Vexi activated another image showing the human ship that had brought the delegation. The vessel looked crude compared to Zephyrian warships with blocky armor and simple weapons. Nothing about it suggested advanced technology or superior firepower. We agreed to let them join us, but only because we needed every ship we could get. High Command assigned me to work with their forces as a military observer. I was to report on their capabilities and determine if they were worth the resources we were spending on this alliance. Commander's voice took on a harder edge. My first mission with the humans was an assault on a hegemony supply depot. The Kepler system, the plan was simple. My battle group would attack from the front while human ships flanked from behind. Standard Zapierian tactics that had served us well for centuries. I boarded their command ship, the Defiance. The corridors were narrow, designed for beings half my size. The crew stared at me as I passed, and I could see fear in their small eyes. Good, I thought, at least they knew their place in the order of things. Vex. I paused, his expression growing thoughtful. Captain Morrison met me on the bridge along with his second in command, Lieutenant Lisa Carter. She was even smaller than Morrison, with yellow hair and pale skin that looked like it would tear at the slightest touch. When she offered tactical suggestions for the mission, I dismissed them immediately. The humans wanted to use stealth and misdirection. They proposed hitting the depot's communication array first, then using small teams to disable key systems, while the main force held the enemy's attention. I told them such cowardly tactics were unnecessary. Zapierian warriors would smash through the defenses with pure strength, as we always had. The commander's mandibles clicked again, but this time the sound carried shame rather than amusement. Morrison tried to argue. He showed me intelligence reports about the depot's defensive systems. He warned that the machines had adapted to our previous attacks and would be ready for a direct assault. I ignored him. When we reached the target, I ordered the attack exactly as Zapierian doctrine demanded. My ships charged straight at the enemy positions, weapons blazing, confident in our superior firepower. For the first few minutes it seemed to work. We destroyed the outer defenses and began pushing toward the depot itself. Vexy's voice grew heavy, then the trap closed. Machines had indeed learned from our tactics. Hidden weapon platforms activated all around us. Swarms of automated fighters poured from concealed hangars. In minutes we went from hunters to prey. The screen showed tactical displays from the battle. Dots representing enemy forces surrounding the blue markers of the Allied fleet. The cadets watched in silence as the blue dots began disappearing one by one. My flagship took heavy damage. Within the first hour, 2 of my escort cruisers were destroyed completely. The remaining ships were scattered, their communications jammed, their formations broken. I had led my warriors into a slaughter, but then something unexpected happened. The human ships, which had been holding back at my orders, suddenly surged forward. Morrison's voice came over the emergency channel, calm and steady despite the chaos around us. All human units execute rescue protocol Alpha. Priority is extraction of Allied forces. Vexy's eyes met those of his young audience. What I witnessed next changed everything I believed about warfare and courage. The humans threw themselves into the teeth of the enemy formation, not to achieve glory or complete the mission, but to save warriors who had treated them with contempt. Lieutenant Carter's destroyer took on 3 hegemony cruisers alone, drawing their fire while damaged. Zapierian ships limped to safety. Captain Morrison's ship rammed a machine battleship that was about to finish off my flagship, his smaller vessel, crumpling like paper but buying us precious time to retreat. The commander's voice grew quiet. I watched from my command deck as human fighters, tiny things that looked like metal insects, swarmed around crippled Zapierian vessels. Their pilots were calling out coordinates to each other, organizing rescue efforts while, under constant fire, some of them died, shielding ships full of warriors who had called them weak. When the retreat order finally came, every surviving Zaffaran ship made it out. We lost equipment and pride, but we kept our lives. The cost was paid by human crews who barely knew us, who had no reason to risk themselves. For ungrateful allies, Beakside turned away from the screen, facing his audience directly. In the aftermath, as we counted our losses and licked our wounds, Captain Morrison came to see me in the medical bay. I expected him to gloat, to remind me how my arrogance had nearly doomed us all. Instead, he sat beside my bed and asked if my wounds were healing properly. When I demanded to know why his people had saved mine, Morrison looked at me with those small human eyes and said something I still think about every day. Because that's what allies do. We don't abandon each other no matter what. The old commander's scarred hands gripped the podium as he concluded the first part of his tale. That day I learned my first lesson about humans. They do not fight because they are strong, they fight because they choose to be strong, even when everything about them suggests they should be weak, and that choice, young ones, makes them the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy. Commander Vexhai moved closer to his audience, his battle-scarred face showing the weight of memory. The young cadet sat in complete silence, waiting for him to continue his tale about the humans who had changed everything. After the disaster at Kepler, I spent 3 weeks in the medical bay thinking about what had happened. My pride was wounded more than my body. For the first time in my military career, I had to admit that another species had shown me something I did not understand. The old warrior's forearms gestured slowly as he spoke. When I was cleared for duty, High Command gave me a choice. I could return to pure Zaffaran units and forget about the humans, or I could continue working with them to learn their methods. Most of my fellow officers chose to go back to our own kind. They said the humans were too strange, too unpredictable. Vex high mandibles clicked with what might have been approval. I chose to stay with them, not because I liked them, but because I needed to understand how such weak creatures could be so effective in battle. Captain Morrison welcomed me back without any mention of my previous failures. Lieutenant Carter simply nodded and handed me a tactical briefing for our next mission. The commander activated the display screen showing images of a massive space station surrounded by defensive platforms. Our target was Kepler Station, a major hegemony stronghold that controlled 3 jump routes. The machines had turned it into a fortress with enough firepower to destroy a small fleet. Previous attacks by other species had failed completely. I expected the humans to plan another desperate charge, maybe with more clever timing. Instead, Morrison called a meeting with all senior officers. What he proposed seemed like madness to me. Vexy's eyes grew bright with remembered surprise. The human plan involved no direct assault at all. Instead, they wanted to send small teams through maintenance tunnels and service ducts to disable the station's key systems. They would use the station's own size against it, striking from within while making the defenders think they faced a much larger attack. The screen showed detailed schematics of the station's interior with tiny passages marked in red. The cadets could See how narrow and complex the route would be. Sergeant Danny Rodriguez would lead the infiltration team. He was a compact human with dark skin and quiet eyes that seemed to notice everything. When I met him, he was studying the station plans with the intensity of a scholar examining ancient texts. Rodriguez explained that humans had experience with this kind of warfare. From their own history, they called it guerrilla fighting using speed and surprise instead of brute force. I told him that Zapirian warriors were too large for such tiny spaces. He smiled and said that was exactly why it would work. Vexe paused, remembering the human's confidence. The plan required perfect timing, while Rodriguez and his team crawled through the station's guts. Corporal Amy Walsh would coordinate diversion attack. Her job was to make the machines think they faced a full invasion fleet. Walsh was even smaller than most humans, with red hair and a voice that could cut through battlefield noise like a blade. When she spoke on the communications channel, every human ship responded instantly. I had never seen such discipline from a species that seemed so chaotic. The commander began pacing as he continued his story. The mission began at dawn ship time. Walsh's squadron approached the station from the main vector, broadcasting fake communications and using electronic countermeasures to make their 12 ships look like 50. The machines responded exactly as she predicted, moving their defenses to face the apparent threat. Meanwhile, Rodriguez and his team launched from a transport hidden behind a dead asteroid. They used tiny insertion pods that looked like space debris. I watched through tactical displays as these little capsules drifted toward the station, completely invisible to enemy sensors. Vexhi's voice grew more animated as he described the infiltration. The human team squeezed through passages that I could barely fit my arm into. They moved in complete silence, communicating through hand signals and brief radio bursts. Rodriguez led them through kilometers of tunnels, never getting lost, never hesitating at intersections. I began to understand that humans had advantages I had never considered. Their small size was not a weakness in this environment. Their flexible bodies let them navigate spaces that would trap larger species. Most importantly, they seemed to think differently about problems. The screen showed the station's power grid with critical junction points highlighted. Rodriguez's target was the main power distribution center, buried deep in the station's core. To reach it, his team had to pass through areas filled with automated defenses, sensor networks, and patrol drones. What amazed me was how they dealt with each obstacle. Instead of fighting through them, they found ways around every challenge. When they encountered a sensor grid, they used the station's own maintenance schedule to time their passage. When patrol drones blocked their path, they created false alarms in other sections to draw them away. Vexy's expression showed grudging admiration. The humans turned the station's complexity into their ally. They used maintenance access codes they had somehow obtained. They followed power conduits and air recycling systems like a map. They even tapped into internal communications to monitor enemy responses. After 6 hours of crawling through darkness, Rodriguez's team reached their target, but the power center was heavily guarded by mechanical sentries that could not be avoided or fooled. This was where the human showed me something I had never seen before. The commander's voice grew quiet. Private Ben Clark volunteered to create a distraction. He was barely 20, human, years old, with brown hair and nervous hands that shook when he thought no one was watching. But when Rodriguez asked for someone to draw the guards away, Clark stepped forward without hesitation. Clark took position at a junction point 50 meters from the power center. He had only basic weapons and improvised explosives made from maintenance supplies. His job was to hold that position long enough for his teammates to complete their mission. Vex high activated combat footage on the screen showing the narrow corridor where Clark made his stand. When the sentries came for him, Clark was ready. He used the confined space to his advantage, forcing the machines to attack one at a time. His first explosion brought down part of the ceiling, creating cover and limiting their movement. For 6 hours, that young human held his position against waves of mechanical attackers. He used their own weapons. When his ran out, he turned maintenance tools into traps. When his explosives were gone, he used the station's own systems against the machines. The cadets watched in amazement as the tactical display showed Clark's impossible defense. Each time it seemed he would be overwhelmed, he found some new way to delay the enemy. Meanwhile, Rodriguez and the others reached the power center, but instead of simply destroying it, they did something that showed the true depth of human thinking. They reprogrammed the entire system, making the station's own defenses turn against each other. Vex's mandibles clicked with appreciation. Within minutes, weapon platforms throughout the station began firing on their own installation. Defense shields fluctuated wildly, leaving gaps that Walsh's squadron exploited perfectly. The humans had turned the fortress into its own worst enemy. When Zahirian reinforcements finally arrived at Clark's position, they found something that challenged everything we thought we knew about warfare. The young human had not just survived his impossible stand, he had eliminated an entire enemy squad, using nothing but determination and creativity. The commander's voice filled with respect. Clark was unconscious from exhaustion and blood loss, but he was still alive. Around him lay the wreckage of machines that should have killed him. In the first few minutes, he had done the impossible through sheer refusal to give up. The station fell within 12 hours. Walsh's diversion had worked perfectly. Rodriguez's infiltration had succeeded beyond all expectations, and Clark's sacrifice had made it all possible. We captured a major hegemony stronghold with minimal losses. Vexi turned to face his young audience directly. That day, I learned my second lesson about humans. They do not win through superior strength or technology. They win because they see possibilities where others see only problems. They turn their weaknesses into weapons and their enemy strengths into vulnerabilities. Most importantly, they understand that every individual can make a difference. Private Clark was not a general or a hero. He was just a young soldier who chose to do his duty when it mattered most. That choice saved the mission and taught me that human courage comes not from fearlessness but from acting despite fear. The old warrior's scarred hands gripped the podium as he concluded. After Kepler Station, I began to study human tactics seriously. I wanted to understand how they could consistently achieve the impossible with Such limited resources, what I discovered would change not just how I fought but how I thought about warfare itself. Commander Vexhi's expression darkened as he prepared to tell the most difficult part of his story. The academy. Hall fell completely silent, sensing that something terrible and important was coming. The old warrior's forearms trembled slightly as he gripped the podium. 3 months after Kepler Station, the war changed forever. He began, his deep voice carrying across the room. Machines had been studying us, learning from every battle, every defeat, every small victory we thought we had won. They were preparing something that would either end the war quickly or destroy us. All. The display screen activated, showing a massive star chart with glowing lines connecting dozens of solar systems. At the center was a bright point labeled Titan's Gate, surrounded by defensive positions that looked like a spider's web of light. Titan's Gate was the key to everything. It was a massive space station that controlled the jump routes to the core worlds where billions of civilians lived. If the hegemony captured it, they could reach the heart of our civilizations within days. Every species in the galaxy would fall. Vexy's mandibles clicked nervously as he continued. Our combined fleets gathered at the staging area, knowing this would be the decisive battle. We had ships from 12 different worlds, warriors from 20 species, weapons that could crack planets in half. It should have been enough to stop any enemy, but our intelligence reports were terrifying. The machines had assembled the largest fleet in recorded history. They had new ship designs we had never seen before, weapons that could punch through any known armor, defensive systems that seemed almost magical in their effectiveness. The commander walked closer to his audience, his scarred face showing the weight of memory. High Command held a final meeting to plan the assault. Every species wanted to use their traditional tactics. The Cathari wanted to charge straight in with their plasma cannons blazing. The Nexari suggested using their shield walls to slowly advance. Each race believed their way was best. Then Colonel Steve Parker stood up to present the human plan. He was older than most human officers I had met, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many battles. When he spoke, his voice was calm but filled with something that made everyone listen. Vexhi activated new images on the screen showing the human fleet positions around Titan's Gate. The ships looked tiny compared to the massive alien vessels, like insects surrounding sleeping giants. Parker's plan was simple and insane. The human fleet would make a direct assault on the strongest part of the enemy formation. They would charge straight into the teeth of the hegemony's defenses, drawing all attention to themselves, while the machines focused on destroying the humans. The Allied fleets would attack from multiple directions. I stood up immediately to protest. Plan was suicide for the human forces. Their ships would be destroyed within minutes against such overwhelming firepower. Parker looked at me with those tired eyes and said something I will never forget. Commander Vexy, sometimes the only way to win is to be willing to lose everything. The old warrior's voice grew heavy with emotion. Major Kate Anderson, Parker's second in command, showed us the detailed calculations. The human fleet could survive perhaps 15 minutes under concentrated fire, but those 15 minutes would give the rest of us the opening we needed to destroy the enemy command ships. I argued with them for hours. I told them there had to be another way. Some clever human trick that could achieve the same result without such terrible cost. Anderson just smiled sadly and shook her head. This time, Commander, there are no tricks, only choices. Vexy paused, his breathing heavy. The battle began at dawn. Fleet time. I watched from the bridge of a Zephyrian dreadnought as the human ships moved into position. There were 200 vessels in their assault group, from massive carriers down to tiny fighters. Every one of them was flying toward certain death. What happened next will haunt me until my last day. As the human fleet approached the enemy line, they began broadcasting on all frequencies. They were singing, every ship, every crew, every human voice joined together in their species' ancient war songs. The commander's voice broke slightly. I had heard human music before, but this was different. These were songs about sacrifice, about standing together when everything seems lost, about choosing to fight even when you know you cannot win. The sound gave me chills that had nothing to do with fear. Commander Rick Hayes led the first wave in his destroyer, the UHS Courage. I watched his ship take hit after hit from enemy weapons, its armor melting away, its systems failing one by one, but Hayes kept flying forward, his crew singing louder as their ship died around them. Vex High activated combat footage that showed the terrible beauty of the human charge. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes, but the survivors kept advancing, their formations never breaking despite impossible losses. Hayes's destroyer was crippled when it reached the enemy flagship. His engines were gone, his weapons destroyed, his crew dying. Any rational being would have ejected, tried to survive. Instead, Hayes activated his ship's emergency thrusters and rammed directly into the Hegemony command vessel's reactor core. The explosion took out half their battle group, one human ship, one crew willing to die for their allies, eliminated dozens of enemy vessels in a single moment, but the cost was 43 human lives who chose duty over survival. The cadets watched in stunned silence as the tactical display showed the massive explosion blooming like a deadly flower among the enemy ships. All across the battlefield, human crews were making the same choice. Captain Lynn Foster's cruiser took on 3 enemy dreadnoughts alone, buying time for a damaged Cthari ship to escape. Lieutenant Bobby Martinez flew his fighter directly into an enemy carrier's hangar bay, his small ship's destruction triggering a chain reaction that crippled the entire vessel. Vexahai's forearms gestured to encompass the scale of the sacrifice. For 15 minutes, the human fleet held the center of the enemy formation. Ship after ship died in flames, but they never retreated, never broke, never stopped singing those ancient songs of defiance. On the ground, human Marines were fighting just as desperately. Lieutenant Sam Torres led a mixed unit of humans and Zephyrins in a desperate assault on the gate's control center. The machines threw everything they had at that small force. Torres was wounded 3 times in the first hour of fighting, but she kept leading her troops forward when enemy reinforcements cut off their retreat. She gathered her remaining soldiers around the control console and made a choice that defined everything I understand about human courage. The screen showed the interior of the control center with its massive computers and gleaming displays. Scorch marks on the walls told the story of desperate fighting in confined spaces. Torres looked at her human and alien Soldiers, all of them, knowing they were about to die, and activated a dead man's switch connected to the facility's main computer core. If the machines killed them all, the explosion would destroy the entire command structure. But Tors did not wait to die. She fought for every second, every breath, every heartbeat. When Zapirian reinforcements finally broke through, they found her standing over the bodies of dozens of mechanical soldiers, still protecting that switch with her dying strength. Vexy's voice grew quiet with awe. The battle turned in those final moments. The human sacrifice had worked exactly as planned. With their command ships destroyed and their control center crippled, the hegemony fleet began to fall apart. Our combined forces swept through their broken formations like a storm, but victory felt hollow when we counted the cost. 90% of the human fleet was gone. Thousands of their best warriors had died in those 15 minutes of hell. An entire generation of human heroes had chosen death over defeat. The old commander turned to face his audience directly. That day I learned my third lesson about humans. They do not fight because they believe they will win. They fight because they believe some things are worth dying for. Their courage comes not from fearlessness, but from love so deep they will burn themselves to ashes to protect what matters. The machine's greatest weakness was that they could not understand this kind of thinking. Their logical minds could calculate tactics and predict strategies, but they could never comprehend beings who grew stronger. The more desperate their situation became. Vexy's scarred hands gripped the podium as he concluded this part of his tale. After Titan's Gate, the hegemony began to retreat. They had learned something that terrified their mechanical minds. They were facing an enemy that would literally set the galaxy on fire before surrendering to tyranny, and that enemy was teaching the rest of us to be just as dangerous. Commander Vexy moved away from the podium, his heavy footsteps echoing the silent academy hall. The young cadets could see that this part of his story would be different, more personal. Somehow his scarred face showed not just the memory of battle, but something deeper and more painful. After Titan's Gate, everything changed for me. He began, his voice softer than before. High Command decided that I should be permanently attached to human units. They said I understood their methods better than any other Zaffiran officer. What they did not know was that I had requested the assignment myself. The old warrior's forearms moved slowly as he gestured toward the memorial wall behind him. I wanted to understand how a species could sacrifice so much for others and still keep fighting. The humans who survived Titan's Gate were not bitter or broken. Instead, they seemed more determined than ever. I was assigned to work with Platoon Sergeant Tony Adams during the campaign to retake the Outer Rim colonies. Adams was a veteran of 12 major battles, with scars covering his arms and a quiet way of speaking that made everyone listen when he talked. Vexy's expression grew thoughtful. The Outer Rim campaign was not like the great space battles we had fought before. This was ground warfare at its most brutal. The machines had turned every captured world into a fortress with automated defenses, and mechanical soldiers dug into positions that had taken months to prepare. Display screens showed images of devastated planets, their surfaces scarred by endless fighting, burned forests, ruined cities, and cratered Landscape stretched as far as the eye could see. The fighting was house to house, bunker to bunker, sometimes room to room. There were no glorious charges or brilliant tactical victories, just the slow, grinding work of taking back each mile of territory, one bloody step at a time. Adams led a mixed unit of humans and Zapirians along with warriors from 6 other species. I expected the different races to have trouble working together, especially under such terrible conditions. Instead, I watched something remarkable happen. Vexa began pacing again, his movements showing the restless energy of remembered combat. The first planet we attacked was called Haven's Rest. It had been a farming world before the machines came, with green fields and peaceful settlements. When we landed, it looked like the surface of a dead moon. Our objective was to capture the main communication center in what used to be the planet's capital city. The machines had turned every building into a bunker, every street into a killing ground. Traditional tactics would have taken months and cost thousands of lives, but Adams had learned from his human comrades. He split our force into small teams, each one containing different species with different abilities. My team included Specialist Maria Santos, a human engineer who could make explosives from household materials. The commander's voice grew warmer as he described Santos. She was small even by human standards, with dark hair and gentle hands that seemed too delicate for warfare. But Maria could look at any building and immediately see its weak points, could turn simple chemicals into weapons that could crack the strongest armor. We spent 3 days moving through the ruins, avoiding main streets and obvious routes. Maria led us through sewers, abandoned basement, and collapsed tunnels. She seemed to have an instinct for finding safe paths through the most dangerous terrain. Vexa activated new images showing the underground network beneath the city. What amazed me was how the humans shared their knowledge with the rest of us. Maria taught Zephyrian warriors how to move silently despite our size. Adam showed Cathari soldiers how to use cover effectively with their heavy weapons. But the real lesson came when we encountered our first serious resistance. A squad of mechanical soldiers had taken position in an old school building, using the children's desks and playground equipment as cover. The sight of those innocent spaces turned into weapons of war filled me with rage. Corporal Chris Martin was with us that day. He was young, maybe 25 human years, with red hair and a quick smile that made him popular with soldiers from every species. When the machines opened fire from the school, Martin did something that showed me the true depth of human determination. The screen displayed tactical maps of the engagement, showing enemy positions marked in red throughout the school complex. The building was too well defended for a direct assault. We could have called for artillery support, but that would have destroyed the structure completely. Adams was trying to figure out another approach when Martin volunteered for a reconnaissance mission. Martin's plan was to crawl through the school's ventilation system and get close enough to the enemy positions to call in precise strikes. The vents were barely large enough for a human, filled with sharp metal edges and electrical hazards. It should have been a suicide mission. Vexahai's voice filled with admiration. But Martin squeezed into that metal maze without hesitation. For 6 hours we listened to his whispered reports over The radio as he mapped every enemy position, every weapon placement, every possible weakness in their defense. Halfway through his mission, Martin's radio went silent. We waited for 20 minutes, fearing the worst before his voice came back online. He had fallen through a damaged vent into a classroom full of enemy soldiers. Instead of being captured or killed, he had eliminated all 6 machines using nothing but a knife and the element of surprise. The cadets listened in amazement as Vexai described Martin's incredible survival. When Martin finally emerged from the building, he was covered in cuts from the sharp metal vents, exhausted from hours of crawling through darkness and bleeding from a dozen small wounds. But he had complete intelligence on every enemy position. Using Martin's information, we cleared the school in 40 minutes with no allied casualties. But what impressed me most was what happened afterward. As we were preparing to move to the next objective, Martin sat down beside a small Nixari warrior who had been wounded in an earlier engagement. Vexai's expression grew soft with memory. The Nixari was young and scared, far from home, and wondering if he would ever see his family again. Martin spent 2 hours talking with him, sharing stories about Earth and listening to tales of the Nixari home world. By the time they finished talking, the young warrior was ready to keep fighting. This scene repeated itself throughout the campaign. Human soldiers would take time to comfort wounded allies, share their rations with hungry comrades, and offer encouragement to those who were losing hope. They did this naturally, without orders or expectation of reward. I began to understand that human strength came not just from individual courage, but from their ability to care for others. Private Helen Woods was our medic, a quiet woman with steady hands and eyes that seemed to see right through you. She treated wounded soldiers from every species with the same gentle care she would give to her own family. The commander's voice grew heavy with emotion. One night after a particularly brutal day of fighting, I found Woods sitting beside Lieutenant Joe Baker, a young human officer who had been mortally wounded by a machine sniper. Baker was dying and everyone knew it, but Woods stayed with him through his final hours. I watched her hold his hand and listened to his stories about home, about the girl he planned to marry after the war, about the children he would never have. When Baker finally died, Woods closed his eyes gently and whispered something in their language that I later learned was a prayer for the dead. Then Woods stood up, wiped her tears, and went back to treating the other wounded. She had work to do, and her personal grief could not interfere with her duty to the living. But I saw how that loss affected her, how each death carved away a piece of her heart. Vexai turned to face his audience directly. During those months in the Outer Rim, I learned my most important lesson about humans. They do not fight because war is glorious or because they enjoy violence. They fight because they love something more than they fear death. Every human soldier carried pictures of family, friends, or places they wanted to protect. They fought not for conquest or glory, but for the right of those they loved to live in peace. This love made them stronger than any weapon, more determined than any machine program. Sergeant Frank Miller explained it to me one night as we shared rations in a bombed-out building. He said, "Commander, we don't fight because we're fearless. We fight because we're terrified of what happens if we lose We'd rather die on our feet than live on our knees, the old warrior's scarred hands gripped the podium as he concluded this part of his tale. By the end of the Outer Rim campaign, something incredible had happened. The mixed units were no longer collections of different species. Working together, we had become families, bound by shared sacrifice and mutual respect. The humans had taught us all how to care for each other the way they cared for us. Commander Vex Hayes stood before the memorial wall, his four hands tracing the names carved into the gleaming metal. The young cadets could see tears forming in his alien eyes as he prepared to tell the final part of his story. His voice was barely above a whisper when he began to speak. The end came faster than any of us expected, he said, turning back to face his audience. Our intelligence teams had been searching for the source of the hegemony's power for 3 years. We knew the machines were controlled by a central intelligence, but finding it had seemed impossible. The display screen activated, showing a barren world at the edge of known space. The planet looked dead, with no atmosphere, no water, and no signs of life. But deep beneath its surface, something glowed with artificial light. The breakthrough came from human scientists working with captured machine technology. Dr. Patricia Lee and her team discovered that all hegemony communications passed through a single processing center, hidden on a world in neutral space. If we could destroy that center, every machine in the galaxy would stop working. Vexy's expression grew grim, but the facility was protected by defenses that made Titan's Gate look simple. Orbital platforms, underground bunkers, automated defense systems that could track and destroy anything larger than a small fighter. A direct assault would be suicide. High Command decided that only a small infiltration team could succeed. The mission required volunteers who were willing to accept that they would probably not return home. I was not surprised when Captain Alex Turner stepped forward to lead the human contingent. The old warrior's voice filled with respect. Turner was everything I had learned to admire about humans. He was brave without being reckless, intelligent without being arrogant, and completely devoted to protecting others. When he spoke, even veteran soldiers from other species listened carefully. Technical Sergeant Julie Ross volunteered to handle the technical aspects of the mission. She was an expert in machine programming and electronic warfare, with skills that seemed almost magical to those of us from less advanced worlds. Vexai began pacing as he continued his tale. The team consisted of 12 members from 6 different species. Turner insisted that I join them, saying my experience with both alien and human tactics would be valuable. I agreed, though I suspected this would be my final mission. We launched from a hidden base, using a stealth transport that human engineers had modified with technology from every allied species. The ship was small, cramped, and uncomfortable, but it could slip past enemy sensors like a whisper in the dark. The screen showed the approach to the target world, with defensive installations marked as glowing red dots surrounding the planet. The infiltration took 18 hours. Ross piloted us through sensor grids and automated patrols with skill that bordered on impossible. Several times, enemy scanners passed within meters of our ship without detecting us. Landing on the planet's surface was the easy part. The real challenge was Reaching the facility entrance, which was hidden beneath 3 km of solid rock, Turner led us through a maze of natural caves and artificial tunnels, following maps that Ross had created from stolen machine data. Vexhaze's voice grew tense. The first casualty came when we encountered a patrol of mechanical guards in the lower tunnels. Corporal Lisa Gray, a Krathari warrior who had become like a sister to the human soldiers, sacrificed herself to seal a tunnel behind us. Her plasma charges brought down half the mountain, but they bought us the time we needed to reach the facility. The processing center was larger than any of us had imagined. It stretched for Killam underground, filled with massive computers and data storage systems that hummed with constant activity. The sound was like standing inside the brain of a sleeping giant. The display showed the facility's interior with corridors that seemed to stretch forever and computer banks that reached toward the ceiling like metal trees. Our objective was the central core where the main intelligence resided. To reach it, we had to pass through layers of security that grew more dangerous with each level. Turner split us into 2 teams. He would lead the assault group to draw enemy attention, while Ross and I approached the core from another direction. It was a desperate plan, but the only one that had any chance of success. Vexy's voice broke slightly. I watched Turner lead his team into a corridor filled with automated defenses, laser grids, explosive charges, robotic sentries that could kill with surgical precision. One by one, his soldiers fell as they cleared the path for Ross and me. Private Kevin Walsh died disabling a security checkpoint. Sergeant Nancy Clark fell to sniper fire while covering our advance. Lieutenant Paul Davis used his body to shield Ross from an explosion that would have killed us both. Each death carved away another piece of my heart. The commander's forearms trembled as he described the final approach. Ross and I reached the core chamber as the facility's alarms began screaming. The main computer was a massive structure that filled the entire room, its lights pulsing like a mechanical heartbeat, but it was heavily defended by the most advanced guards we had ever seen. Ross immediately began working on the computer interface, her fingers flying over controls that looked like they belonged in a nightmare. She said she needed 10 minutes to upload the virus that would destroy the hegemony central intelligence, but we did not have 10 minutes. The mechanical guards were advancing, and I could hear the sounds of Turner's team fighting desperately in the corridors outside. Ross looked at me with tears in her eyes and said something I will never forget. Commander, tell them we tried our best. Vexy's voice grew quiet with awe. Then Turner appeared in the doorway, his armor cracked and smoking from battle damage. Half his team was gone, but he had reached us in time. He took position beside me, his weapon ready, and said simply, how long does she need? 8 minutes, I told him. Turner nodded and began firing at the advancing guards. Then we hold for 8 minutes, he said. No matter what. The screen showed the tactical situation with enemy forces surrounding their position from multiple directions. For 8 minutes, Turner and I fought side by side against impossible odds. We used everything we had learned about human tactics, Zapirian strength, and desperate courage. Turner moved like a dancer, using cover and misdirection to confuse the mechanical soldiers. When his ammunition ran out, he fought with His knife, when his knife broke, he used. His bare hands, he never stopped moving. Never stopped fighting, never stopped. Believing we could succeed, with 30 seconds remaining, the guards finally overwhelmed our position. Turner took a fatal hit while protecting Ross, but he kept fighting even as his life drained away. He looked at me one final time and whispered, "Take care of her, Beeksa." Wiped tears from his alien eyes. Ross finished her work just as the facility began to shake apart. The virus was spreading through the hegemony network, destroying every connection, every command protocol, every piece of programming that held their empire together. But the facility's self-destruct system had activated. We had perhaps 3 minutes to escape before the entire mountain collapsed. Ross was exhausted from her technical work. Barely able to walk, I carried her through corridors that were falling apart around us. We almost did not make it. The tunnels were collapsing. The way out was blocked, and I could feel the mountain dying above us. But then I heard a voice calling our names. Private Gary Lewis, the youngest member of our team, had stayed behind to guide survivors to safety. The old warrior's voice filled with pride. Lewis was only 19 human years old, barely out of training, but he had mapped every tunnel, every passage, every possible escape route. He led us through sections of the facility that were not on any official plans. As we reached the surface, the mountain exploded behind us. The processing center, the computers, the central intelligence that had controlled trillions of mechanical soldiers, all of it was gone, but so were most of our friends. Vexy turned toward the memorial wall. 3 days later, every hegemony unit in the galaxy simply stopped functioning. Ships drifted powerless through space. Ground forces collapsed where they stood. The war was over, but victory felt hollow when we counted the cost. Turner was gone. Most of his team had died in those final minutes. Ross survived, but she carried scars that would never heal. And Lewis, the boy who had saved us all, never spoke about what he had seen in those collapsing tunnels. The commander faced his audience for the final time. The war ended, but the lessons remained. I learned that humans do not fight because they are stronger or smarter or better equipped than their enemies. They fight because they choose to protect what they love, no matter the cost. Turner could have retreated when the situation became hopeless. Ross could have given up when the technical challenges seemed impossible. Lewis could have saved himself instead of helping others escape, but they chose duty over safety, love over fear, sacrifice over survival. Vexi placed his hand on a small human flag beside the memorial. This flag was given to me by Gary Lewis himself, now an old soldier with grandchildren who will grow up in a galaxy made safe by those who came before. He still writes to me, sharing stories of peace that exist because young humans were willing to die for strangers they had never met.